Hello everyone, welcome back to the SharePoint Framework series. I am Akshay, and in this episode, we are focusing on one of the most powerful feature of SPFx, that is integrating web parts with Microsoft services. Microsoft offers a variety of services like Microsoft Graph, SharePoint REST API, and Power Automate that allows us to enhance our SPFx solutions. By the end of this video, you will know how to connect your web parts to these services and fetch dynamic data seamlessly. Let's get started. Let's start with a quick overview of Microsoft services. Microsoft Graph API. It provides access to data from Microsoft 365 services like users, groups, calendars, and files. SharePoint REST API. It allows interaction with SharePoint data such as lists, libraries, and sites. Power Automate integration. It automates workflows and connects external systems to SharePoint. These services allow us to create dynamic interactive web parts that integrate seamlessly with the Microsoft ecosystem. Let's start by integrating your SPFX web part with the Microsoft Graph API, a powerful way to access data from Microsoft 365 services like users, groups, and emails. Here is how you can do it. The very first step in integrating with Microsoft Graph API is granting API permission to your app. There are multiple ways to do it, like you can manually register your app in Azure AD. This involves creating an app registration in Azure and then configuring its permission and using it within your SPFX solution. The other method is requesting permissions through package-solution.json from your SPFX. This method lets you define the required permission directly in your SPFX solution. You can request permissions like user.read or mail.read and others. When deploying your solution to SharePoint App Catalog, you will be prompted to grant these permissions. Today, we will focus on using package-solution.json method and deploying the solution to the App Catalog. Later in the series, we will explore additional methods such as using Enterprise App to generate secure token for accessing Graph API. Now let's move on to the demo where I will show you how to configure permissions and deploy your solution. Open your project and go to webpart.ts file. Here I have made some changes in the onInit functions. Here, using this context, I am calling ms graph client factory to get the token and make a call to Graph API. Since we are using Graph API version 3, I am using .client and then passing 3 as a parameter, which is the version. The endpoint I am calling is /me and the response is logged to the console using console.log. Next, I have updated the package-solution.json file in the config folder. Here, I have added the required web API permission request. Here you can see I have added resource as Microsoft Graph and scope as user.readbasic.all. This allows the app to fetch basic user information. Run the gulp command in Visual Studio Code to serve the project. Then open the SharePoint Online Workbench, add the web part, and you will notice in the console that the Graph API response is null. This happens because the app does not have the required permissions yet. Let's now create a package and deploy the solution. Stop the local server using Ctrl+C, then create a production package by running the following commands. Gulp clean, gulp bundle -- ship, gulp package-solution -ship. Now go to your app catalog, upload the solution package and deploy it. When prompted, ensure you selected make the solution available to all sites in the organization. You will also notice a message saying, please contact your tenant admin to ensure access to such endpoints. This is a security measure for approving the Graph API permissions. Head over to your SharePoint admin dashboard, go to Advanced API Access. Under the pending request, you will find the package requesting permissions. Select it, review the details and click Approve. Then again, review the details and click Approve again to confirm. Now go back to Visual Studio Code and run gulp serve. Open the workbench again, add the web part and this time check the console log. You will see that the Graph API call is successful and the /me endpoint is returning the expected user details. That's it. You have successfully integrated Microsoft Graph API with SPFx web part. Next, let's connect to the SharePoint REST API to retrieve data from a list. We will use SPHTTP client class for interacting with SharePoint. On the right hand side, you can see a code which retrieves all the list items from a specified SharePoint list and then displays them in the console. Let's open our project and navigate to webpart.ts file. Here, I have made some changes to the code. Starting at the line 52, I have added a call to SharePoint REST API. This is inside the onInit function. Here, I am using this .context.sphttp client to make the REST API call. The API fetches all the list items from a list called myList. Then, the retrieved data is logged in the console using console.log. Save the file and open the SharePoint workbench. After adding the web part, you will notice the data is being logged in the console. Expanding the log reveals all the list items retrieved from myList. For example, one of the list items includes a title called SPFx, which matches the data in the list. That's it. You have successfully integrated the SharePoint REST API with your SPFx web part. Finally, let's integrate our SPFx web part with Power Automate to trigger workflows. First, we will create a Power Automate flow, and then we will trigger it from SPFx. Let's go step by step. First, we will create a Power Automate flow. Go to make.powerautomate.com and create a workflow. I have named mine call from SPFx. From the trigger, use when an HTTP request is received. Under the trigger setting, set who can access the trigger flow to anyone. You will notice an empty HTTP post URL at first. Don't worry, it will be populated later on automatically. Next, you will define the request body. Click on Use Sample Payload to generate schema. Copy and paste a sample payload like I am doing here. Make sure the object keys like message are in double quotes. Once you do this, Power Automate will automatically generate the JSON schema for you. Now add SharePoint create item action to the flow. Use a SharePoint list. I'm using one called myList and map the message from the request body to the title field of the item. Finally, add a response action. Set the status code to 200 and include the ID of the newly created list item in the response. Save the flow and you will now see the HTTP post URL. Copy it for the next step. In your SPFx project, open the webpart.ts file and go to onInit function. I have written my code in onInit function, but you can also add it on click of a button. Now, create a variable called powerautomate URL and paste the HTTP post URL. And add an HTTP post call using this .context.http client. Here, how's the post call structured? Headers, set content-type to application/JSON and body, message, here I'm writing triggered from SPFx. If the call succeeds, it will log Power Automate triggered successfully along with the new list item ID. If it fails, then it will log the error. Let's see it in action. Open the SharePoint workbench. Before refreshing, let's check the My list here. You can see there are only 3 items. Now refresh the workbench to initialize the web part. In the console, you will see a message Power Automate triggered successfully along with the created item ID which is 13. Let's go back to the list and refresh it. You will now see a new item with the title triggered from SPFx. And that's it. You have successfully triggered a Power Automate flow from SPFx web part and created a SharePoint list item. Before deploying these integrations, ensure the following security measures. Grant necessary permissions. Update Azure AD and SharePoint API permissions as required. Use context-sensitive data. Only display data that the current user is authorized to see. Handle errors gracefully. Use try-catch blocks to manage errors and provide feedback to the users. Following these best practices ensures your integrations are secure and user-friendly. Let's recap what we covered today. We integrated SPFx with Microsoft Graph API to fetch user data. We connected to the SharePoint REST API to retrieve list items. We triggered a Power Automate flow from a SPFx web part. And we discussed security and permissions to ensure safe integrations. And for best practices, use the least privilege principle for API permissions. Always test integrations thoroughly in staging environments. and log API requests and responses for debugging. If you found this video helpful, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications for future updates. Let me know in the comments which SPFx features you are excited to learn next. Thank you so much for watching. In the next video, we will explore how to do remote debugging in SPFx. Until then, happy coding.